Evolutionary Hardcore 2.0 is coming your way. This is episode 158. This is going to be a really important one. We're going to talk about cycling steroids while keeping sperm count high, presented by Ultima. So this is going to be a really good one. I don't really, this is a really, really good. Monster and I worked really hard at researching this one, and really we took a long time on the pre-show. So this is one you're going to want to keep an eye on. We're going to talk about different things. We're going to talk about steroid use and balancing fertility, the facts and the science behind it. We're going to talk about sperm motility and Mobster's experience with pregnancy. We're going to talk about ancillaries that have possible benefits. We're going to talk about short and mild cycles from Ultima that you should consider for fertility. And then we're going to talk about why Ultima is trusted by professionals. But first, let's talk a little bit about the podcast guys and gals out there. And as you probably check out on the interwebs, different podcasts, you probably see a lot of information out there that's really, really bad. And the reason for that is, look, these professional bodybuilders, they don't really know shit about this stuff. A lot of them, 95% of them, really don't know shit. But because they look a certain way, they're doing these podcasts. They get hired to do these podcasts. They don't get hired based on their merits. They don't get hired based on their knowledge. They don't get hired based on their education. They get hired by the way they look. So, like example, I saw a guy yesterday. He's an IFBB pro doing a podcast about tren, and he says, "Oh, tren was developed for cattle, and then bodybuilders started using it as a vet steroid." And I was just shaking my head. If you listen to our podcast, literally the last podcast we did where we talked about tren, we explained that tren was actually produced by Negma out of France for almost 20 years. So it was in fact human grade. So that just shows you these professionals, they just take these steroids and they don't actually know what they're taking. They don't know the history of these steroids. They don't know how they work in their body. So it's the complete opposite of what we do on this podcast. We try to educate you. We try to show you about this stuff. You wouldn't go buy a car without doing research on how fast the car is, how much gas the car needs, how much battery, if it's an electric car, the car needs, what kind of tires the car needs. You want to go buy a car without doing your research on the price, on the MSRP, on the lease price, on how much you have to put down. You wouldn't do that. So why do people take steroids without having knowledge about them? So this is what we try to do on this podcast, show you how to use these steroids properly, and we bring the knowledge and the science and the facts because truth matters in this world. And in the end, truth will always prevail. Okay,
Yeah,
in the end.
yeah.
So that's what we try to do on this podcast. That's why we're different than other podcasts. Monster?
100%, Steve. I've done 3 months research before I bought some steel security doors here, much to the amusement of my girlfriend. You're going to spend that kind of money, you want to know what you're doing. Listen, guys, it's your body. You've got one chance in life, as these songs like to tell you. And to do things the right way to get the best benefits from it. And ultimately, I mean, just the topic of this podcast, Steve, is about preserving some sort of level of fertility, even though you're going to use performance enhancing drugs. Okay, so it's important that you get these things right. We're constantly expanding this channel. We're constantly trying to add new streams, and that way we get to spread the word around, and you get more knowledge. You could be listening on one of those channels today, whether that's Spotify or Apple, which is one of the two of the new, more recent streams that we've added. And the way that you know that this how this works, you've been told enough times. It is literally going to be a case of you clicking like, you commenting, and you sharing. And especially if you subscribe, that's absolutely fabulous because all that stuff works. The algorithm allows you to hear more, to see more, to find more from us, and to spread the word out to other listeners just like yourself. So you'll be helping out other people like you that want to train, that want to get things right, want to progress, want to add muscle, want to get lean. So yeah, back to you, Stephen. Just help us out, listeners, by doing just that for us today.
All right, let's get into steroid use and balancing fertility facts and science. So when we use anabolic steroids, it doesn't matter which one you use. Now, certain anabolic steroids, of course, are going to be a little less suppressive than others. Something like Proviron may be non-suppressive entirely. I've seen half people when I've seen blood work not even get suppressed on Proviron. But of course, when you're using it with other steroids, it's still going to be suppressive. So when you the point is when you use exogenous anabolic steroids, They go in your body. Your pituitary glands notice them in your body and say, "Hey, we've got an excessive amount of hormones. Therefore, I'm going to go ahead and shut down and go dormant because why would I produce hormones anymore? Why would I produce LH? Why would I produce FSH? Why would I keep the reproductive system humming when we have an excessive amount of hormones?" So, what happens is it starts getting suppressed and it starts getting shut down. And what that happens is your hormones are no longer feeding your Leydig cells. So your Leydig cells in turn get shut down, and you'll notice your balls will start shrinking. Now, this is going to be a little different for everybody, but if you've been on steroids a long time or being on TRT a long time, you'll probably notice that your balls are pretty much gone. And I think my first cycle, it was probably maybe 7 or 8 weeks into it. I went from having really big balls to having raisin balls. And I knew that it would happen because I read about using steroids before. So it wasn't a surprise to me, but that's pretty much what happens. And when that happens, obviously, your sperm count and your fertility will drop. And we're going to get into the next segment about where we're going to talk about sperm motility and numbers and give you some more information on that. And Mobster will tell you the story about his pregnancy. But what happens in this situation is the longer you stay on gear, the more suppressed and the more shut down you become because your body will forget how to produce it. And also, it's the your fighting age as well, because as you get older, naturally, your sperm count will also start dropping. Your growth hormone will start dropping. Your hormones will start dropping. Your reproductive system will start getting worse and worse. This is why, as a man, once you start getting into your 50s and especially your 60s and 70s, it becomes more and more difficult, even without steroids entering the equation, to have children. So, and that's just the way we evolved. Our ancestors did not live to 70, 80 years old. They get a little cut on their arm, it turns into an infection and it turns into gangrene and
Yeah.
it gets into the bloodstream and they died of infections and they died of going to battle and they died
Oh,
of from
tooth
animals.
decay, Steve. They had
Yeah,
abscesses. They would die from tooth decay.
exactly.
The
Yeah.
average caveman back in the day, Neanderthals, I believe you was an old man of the tribe if you hit 35 years of age.
So
So
it
we
wasn't necessary for humans to have the
no,
ability to reproduce at a later age. So that's working against you as well. So everything is working against you as you get older. And when you throw anabolic steroids in the mix, because of what they do to your pituitary glands and your reproductive system, that makes it even worse. So in this podcast, we're going to give you some ideas that you can do to kind of prevent that. Monster, go ahead.
absolutely, Steve. I mean, look, we've done shows on fertility, not necessarily specifically sperm counts, where we talked about the issues of pollution, the issues of stress, the issues of modern society, and the modern versions of stress, even just from getting pissed off with what you see in the media and stuff on social media and so on and so forth. And then we've talked about the fertility levels dropping, sperm count levels just dropping from generation to generation. Your great granddaddy had a better sperm count than you. Your granddad had a better sperm count. Your dad had a better sperm count. So yeah, I mean it's just ridiculous in that particular thing. And then we will drink, we will smoke, we will use recreational drugs, and even the prescribed medications that some of you are on, and literally just being unhealthy. Now, if you're listening to this show, because I don't want to be too dark and horrible, you should be eating well. You should be, as we've said on other shows, Steve, hitting the organic section of the supermarket. You should be getting local produce. And you should be, of course, training. And if you're not absolutely destroying your body in the gym, you should, arguably, Steve, you should have decent cardiovascular conditioning. You should have good muscle tone and so on and so forth. Not everybody that's listening to the show wants to be a freak. But I'd imagine, and of course we are specifically focusing on the men today, most of you at some point, and I'm thinking about our demographic age-wise here, Steve, our demographic is somewhere between 18 to 35. And between 25 and 35 is when most of you, statistically speaking, are probably going to start thinking about relationships, long-term relationships, getting married, having kids, and so on and so forth. And it's also arguably when you're the most capable in terms of normal fertility levels. You are career-wise, you're hitting it. College-wise, you're finished, and so on and so forth. And there's just a natural course of things. Potentially, arguably, previous generations slightly earlier. This is just what's normal now as you listen to this show in 2025. So all those things considered, and the choice, as a lot of our listeners will be making, Steve, to use PEDs to enhance their physiques, there will be a small part that you would need to consider, which is in regards to fertility, and specifically, as we're discussing today, Steve, the shape, the size, the strength, the numbers, etc., 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 of your sperm counts, and therefore your ability to procreate, fertilize an egg, and become a baby daddy. I mean, that's just the bottom line. And it's almost like it's been a joke in the past. It's been memes, it's been jokes, the staple of many a comedian's routine. And we do this because we joke about it, because if we thought about it seriously, we might actually get a bit pissed off of ourselves and the decision. So we're going to try as best we possibly can to talk about these things in scientific terms, to give you the factual information, as Steve said, not the stuff that people just think they're supposed to say, to be real. And at the same time, you understand that you might cause issues by using PEDs. So the best possible way that we can encourage you to do, with low dosages, shorter cycles, and keeping as best as possible your fertility levels high when you need them to be that particular way. But you obviously need to understand the facts, the reality of certain situations. And that's what we're going to touch on today, Steve.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, let's be honest with ourselves. When we use these anabolic steroids, they do damage to our reproductive system. They do damage to other things like our organs as well. But again, as you get older, you're going to cause more damage to your organs. And as I said earlier, you're going to have your reproductive system get worse. And as Mobster said, there's other things in our environment, foods we're eating, the water we're drinking, even where you're living. We're seeing a lot of farmland being turned into suburban neighborhoods now in America as we continue to grow and as developers are developing this land. They buy the land from the farmers whose great grandson is more than happy to sell them the land for $5 million. Then they take that land and they start building houses on it. Well,
let me give you a crazy example, Steve, that I know that you're aware of. A lot of you will buy food from the supermarket, even make a lunch for yourself, in plastics that will affect your fertility. Literally, I can't remember what it is, Steve, but I've seen this again and again. The Tupperware tubs of old, the plastic containers, the disposable containers from fast food that people reused, some of those plastics affected you in a way. The microplastics, the stuff that was being put in, that's getting into your system and absorbed through your digestive tract. So there's so many things that we do that you mentioned on previous shows. And I'm guilty of this myself. There are chemicals, as you said, underneath my sink in my kitchen, which are inherently poisonous. There are things that we wash with, both in washing my dishes, washing my clothes, what I wash my skin, my hair, etc. with, which in excess, with colorations and flavorings and scents and chemicals that do the job they're supposed to do, also taken to excess, fuck us up. And even as I said earlier on, Steve, I'll reiterate a point I made earlier. Some of you, and I'm thinking specific of our American audience, the average American adult is on 5 prescribed medications. I would guarantee you, if you go away and look at the 5 medications, if you're on that many, and I hope some of you are not, at least one of those taken long enough, frequently enough, and perhaps you shouldn't even be taking it for as long as you've taken it. One of those will have some effect on your fertility. And we do this every single day. And literally, I think what was one of the things that we didn't have in the old days, Steve, that most cars have now, you didn't have a HEPA filter. So the air that you're breathing in your car is cleaner than the air in your house, in your office, and it's certainly cleaner when you're walking down the street. And the bigger the city you live in versus the smaller towns, etc., the more of these pollutants and so on. I've literally worked in that environment myself. So you
Yeah.
get to understand over time that sort of the necessity of having knowledge of these things and understanding these things and working the risk versus reward, the muscle versus the impact on your suppression and so on.
Yeah, and what I was saying is you're living on farmland that was sprayed year after year after year with herbicides and pesticides. So now you're living in it, and now that herbicide and pesticide is in your soil and it's coming up through those cracks in your house. And when you sleep at night, it's coming up through those pipes and it's coming up through the cracks, and you're basically absorbing them in your body. And if you don't believe me in this, even if you're one of those skeptics out there, you're like, oh, Steve, it's not going to matter, blah, blah, blah. Here's the thing, if you go to these doe websites out there with missing persons or where they find a person dead and they don't know who they are, and they're trying to find out who, where they came from or what their name is or anything. What's interesting is they'll know where that person spent most of their life based on the chemicals, these forever chemicals that are still in their body. So they'll be like, wow, this person, we believe, spent majority of their life in Eastern Ohio because they have so and so chemical in their body. Do you recognize this person? And then they'll have a picture of the dead person or a composite of their face or something. And that will help identify them. So it's amazing that we can tell where a person lived, a dead person lived, based on the chemicals in their body. So that tells you all you need to know. So unfortunately, there's things there's sometimes we can't control it, but there are some ways we can control it. We've actually seen sperm counts in parts of the country drop, and we've seen cancer rates go up, and we've seen different little hot spots throughout the country because of this stuff. So it's very, very important to be aware of that, and you got to do everything you can to control what you can control. And as Mobster said, go under your sink when you're done listening to this podcast, or pause the podcast right now and go look under your sink and look at all the chemicals under your sink. You got to put those outside your house. You got to store them in your shed. You got to store them in your garage, maybe. Just got to be away from you. You don't want those things close to you, because that's going to have an effect, not just on your sperm count, but other things in your body as well. So we got to do what we got to do to help out. So let's move on, Mobster. Sperm motility, and we're talking about a little bit of your experience. So let me give you some facts, and Mobster, you can jump in as well, talk about these. If you research sperm motility, we're looking at 15 million sperm per milliliter of semen to 200 million or more. That's the average that we have in our body. Now, when you use anabolic steroids, this number will drop. I've looked at different sperm counts from some of my clients who've had fertility issues. They usually have a hard time staying above that 15 million mark. I've seen numbers from 0 to 14 million. So, and this is just from running like 2 or 3 cycles. This isn't from people necessarily that have run tons of steroids or for a long period of time. But obviously, the more you run steroids, the more it's going to be affected. So, sperm motility is basically your sperm has a hard time, okay, once it's inside the female and trying to find the egg. It's not a good swimmer. So if
No.
you ever go to like the swimming public swimming pool and you watch people swim laps, you can tell who's a bad swimmer and who's a good swimmer. So when you use anabolic steroids, the motility of the sperm
Yeah.
is not going to be good. So it's not just about the number, which
Yeah.
is going to drop, but it's also the motility of that sperm. So if you got 14 million sperm, which is almost to 15 million, I'll give you an example, but the motility of those 14 million sperm are not good, then your chance of getting that sperm making it to the egg is going to be that much less. So it's all about odds. But again, it just takes one sperm, and we've seen people who have abused anabolic steroids still manage to get their girlfriend or wife pregnant, even though they've been using steroids. So again, it just takes one sperm getting there, even if it's not a strong swimmer, to get there. So that's the good news. But the bad news is the odds are working against you.
Yeah. Listen, guys, let me use an analogy for you, Steve. You go to the casino and you can look the odds up for the roulette table. You can look the odds up for the poker table, whatever game do you like to play. And you know how much the casino gets. and you know your chance of getting rolling two sixes on the dice and craps or whatever else, right? Imagine if the odds you were told, and ironically, Steve, that's what Euro Millions Euro in the UK. My chance of winning the Euro Millions is about the same as this, the 15 million to 1 chance of me winning a jackpot. You would not go to a casino and get on the one arm bandits or play poker or whatever else if the odds were 15 million to 1. So, what we're talking about here today is a way of making the odds more favorable to you. But you need to understand some of the biology that Steve's just mentioned, literally the shape of the swimmer. When scientists analyze people's sperm, and they say there's a lot more mutated sperm in here, and there's sperm in here with no tails or two tails, they're swimming around in circles and so on and so forth. We use the phrase sometimes when it comes to swim, and I say to swimmer just now, Steve, you want a good, strong, healthy swimmer, and you want 14 or 15 million as a minimum of these swimmers. Now, if the odds drop as the number of swimmers increase, the odds, we don't want a 15 to million to 1 or 200 million to 1. We want hundreds of thousands, if not millions of these fuckers, 60, 70 million swimming like a bastard. Especially, listen, let me touch on this as well, Steve. I've literally expressed this on other shows about fertility when we specifically said, I know individuals of a certain age and a great education with disposable income who've absolutely stressed the fuck out of themselves. It's physically uncomfortable. It is emotionally stressful for both parties when they've had to go down the IVF route. And I'm thinking specifically, not even an abuser, a low using, because I've seen the amounts this person's used, he's discussed it openly and honestly, a former IFBB pro, and it's cost him and his wife thousands, tens of thousands probably, Steve, and it has been properly physically upsetting and properly emotionally upsetting. And they are not unique in this particular regard. So again, we need to understand why, the how, the basic biology stuff that we almost should have learned at school when it comes to these kind of things. Sex education sometimes touches on it, but we kind of put that stuff at the back of our mind when we're out there arguably rolling the dice when it comes to PD use. So yeah, have an understanding of how you can do these things. And just as an example, Steve, I talk about semen analysis here, and I mentioned it just now. Literally going to a clinic, getting a sample into a test tube, into a cup or whatever else, and then that stuff's looked underneath the microscope, and they will literally count what they can see within a certain area, how many, the quality, the reproductive possibilities, and so on and so forth. And again, over time, with some of the things that we've already spoken about, you will start to see fractured, not the right shape, not swimming in circles, and all that kind of stuff. So that's super, super important. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
all of these things. Oh, yeah,
yeah,
go on.
yeah.
All of
Really
these
quick.
things play a role.
Yeah, really quick on that. You can also get the kits ordered to your house if you don't want to go to the
Yes,
clinic.
you
But
don't have to do that kind of thing. Yeah,
yeah, but these types of tests, I've seen them for like 20, $30 on Amazon. The problem with these is they're not accurate. So they'll basically tell you, yes, you have sperm, or yes, you don't, or no, you don't. So it's not going to give you the accurate numbers that you need if you're really serious about it. So in the end, it makes more sense just to go to a clinic and save yourself the hassle. But if you just want to, do it that way, you can just to get an idea, because it might just like the test might come out and say, yeah, you have zero sperm, and then you'll know, wow, these steroids that I've, cycles that I've been using have really screwed me up. So you can try that way if you want to just give that a whirl and read the reviews on these different kits. Some of the kits aren't worth a damn that you're buying online. They're just not any good. Some people will say, "Oh, I got the kit said one thing, and then when I went to the clinic, it said a different thing." You see, so if you're serious about knowing this, I would just go to the clinic.
yeah.
And then you have something called Azvus. What is this? Azoospermia.
Azoospermia. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where people have no sperm in their semen at all. So this is something that some people have with or without steroids.
Mm.
And that's something that you aren't going to know unless you get it tested, right? So, but that's essentially what happens. A lot of people who are on TRT a long period of time or who abuse steroids on, over the course of years, they
Even
end
in
up.
sports, Steve, we know of people, athletes that have had damage to their testicles because of sports injuries they had when they were in their teens and their early 20s. Literally, a knee to the nutsack, twisted testicles in wrestling or whatever, or even undescended testicles, or even just damage to the vas deferens, the actual tube that comes from the testicles with the sperm, hits the semen fluid coming from your prostate and comes out the end, as we obviously all know. And damage to that just literally knots in the tube or scar tissue where it's bound together. And of course, obviously, when they've actually had the snip, essentially that's what's happened accidentally. That's perfectly. I say it's perfectly normal. It's not statistically unlikely. And even silly things like one testicle works perfectly fine, but the other one doesn't. So you'll cut your odds 50% in half. And none of these things are crazy out there, statistically unlikely. Undescended testicles, there's operations for these things, but the damage could have been caused. Literally, the reason your balls are supposed to hang low is because the body temperature, internal core body temperature, is too high. So if you have undescended testicles, which is not uncommon, this can cause problems in the developmental stage. And so, yeah, some of these things are out there. And that's without even getting to start, asexual, how do you identify and whatever else, because that doesn't make much of a difference to your testicles. They carry on doing what they're doing. But it's possible. I mean, just one African athlete, Steve, there was a big issue with regards to whether she was using steroids or not, and it turned out that she'd had a twin, which had mutated into her body when the mother was pregnant, and she was producing testosterone at a higher level than she would have been as a woman because she had part of the twin that was still contained within her physically from when she'd been born, included testicles that were still in the body, still in her body. So she had a uterus, she had a vagina, she had all the normal reproductive organs that a female would have, but she also still had testicles inside her body that were producing, if no sperm, certainly low levels of testosterone, but at a level that was sufficiently high that it made her fail certain tests, that the ratios were all wrong. And of course, they found out medically that there was a reason for this. So this stuff's out there. It's not something you see every single day, but it's also not uncommon. So you might need to know these things. You might need, certainly listening to this show would benefit you rather than going to a clinic and a sort of being horrified at the outcome or whatever else. You'll have a sort of understanding of the reasons why and how this can happen to you. Back to you, Steve.
Yeah, and Mobster touched upon earlier about the stress. And what happens is I've seen this a lot too, Mobster. A lot of people feel, they get married and they feel like I need to have a kid, I need to have a kid.
Yep. Yep.
And they get married older in life, and we see this a lot
More
more.
and more now. Yep. Yep.
Yeah. There's different economic factors for that. There's also
Yep.
educational reasons for that.
Yes.
There's also career reasons for that.
Yep.
And it's become more imperative to establish yourself, with a career and get a house first and get a car first and have money in the bank first. Back
Mm.
in your day, Mobster, people would get married with $5 in their pocket. My parents got married with $5 in their pocket. I'm sure
Oh,
your
Christ,
parents
yeah.
got married with
Yeah,
$5 in their pocket.
absolutely.
Now that's unheard of.
Yeah.
That's people who do that now, we laugh at them. We call them stupid because it's a stupid decision to do that. But that's the reality of things. And what happens is back in those days it was common to get married. Like you ever watch those dating shows back in the 80s and the person would be in their 30s and they'd be like divorced once, divorced twice. And it's just like they're
Mm.
in their 30s and they're divorced twice because you're told, back then in society accepted that you marry the first person to give you a hand job right out of high school. Now that's not the case. Now,
My mum and dad. My mum was 19, and my dad was 20. And I've run the numbers, as we like to say. And I know, Steve, that they got married because Muggins, I'm the number one son, the firstborn, was already sort of making his presence felt. So shall we say? So they got married because Mum was already pregnant. I don't think it was some drastically horrible thing because They was in love at the time, etc., etc. But the decision was made, and that's not unusual. I would argue that for my mum's generation, my dad's generation, people average between 21 and 24. But for the reasons that Steve's already said, people are leaving it a lot later. And the reality of that situation, and I think to speak specifically of lawyers and solicitors and accountants and so on and so forth, you do not reach the peak of your career, typically it's your late 30s, early 40s. That is a horrendously difficult time to try and get pregnant at that particular point. And it's, again, look, the stress, the couples, there are videos, you guys have looked this up, I've seen them crying, both parties, man and woman crying, Steve, crying when they've actually managed to get pregnant and the child's on its way, but crying with the stress. And that kind of stress arguably is up there with birth, deaths, marriages, divorces, or whatever else. And it is, and I mentioned it with the IVF thing earlier on, and arguably, ironically, it's actually making it that much harder because you are that physically stressed by your emotions that you're going to actually have an impact on your testosterone, your estrogen, your sperm count, your egg count, and so on and so forth. And here's another thing as well. When it comes to women specifically, but it doesn't count here today, women only have a certain number of eggs. Let's say it's 100, Steve. So 100 cycles, and that's it. I don't know if it is 100. It's probably slightly more. But that's it. There is just that number. And at some point, there won't be any more. It might be 40 or 50 years of age, certainly if they get to menopause. With men, our ability to produce sperm in a healthy and ideal situation is for life. But one would imagine, of course, if you're 90, it's not going to be quite as many as when you're 21. That's kind of obvious. But keep all these things in mind, guys. When we get into my, and I'll touch on this now, Steve, when we get into my own steroid use, and we're going to talk about me becoming a father and a grandfather, my steroid use did not start until I was 37. And I believe I was 26 or 27 when I became a father. So I was 10 years past becoming a father. I was almost middle-aged. So we've talked about training for as long as possible, but people make certain particular decisions in that regard. So this is just what I did. Steve's had a similar experience in terms of leaving it a long time, but also a few near misses, which we'll discuss again. So arguably, I maximized my natural ability to lift weights, be stronger, build muscle, etc., for as long as possible. And I was already a dad. I would argue now, Steve, that I really, especially at 60 years of age, as I do this show, I've got absolute, I don't care what my fertility's level are like. That choice was arguably taken away from me. But for those of you that are listening, you're aware of it and you are thinking about the decisions. You're asking for education. It's the reason why you're listening to this show. So we need you to understand how those decisions can be taken away, but equally, the smarter you are with cycles, the longer you leave it, the more you get out of your natural natty status, the better, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and let me we got to move on, but my point, what I was trying to get at was that a lot of you younger people are listening to this, and maybe you're in your late teens and 20s, and you're like, I want to use steroids, I want to use steroids. Just keep in mind kind of what we're getting at. Because what happens is when you get older, you're not thinking about it right now. But once you get older, you start getting in your 30s and then early 40s, and then you get married, and you can't produce sperm. Okay, it's gonna cause a destruction of your relationship and a destruction of your marriage because the woman is gonna look at you. She's not gonna care that you're strong. She's not gonna care that you're muscular. She's gonna care that you can't produce sperm. So right now it might seem like, well, I want more muscle. I want to look this certain way. I want to do this. I want to get girls. Because girls maybe right now look at you and they're like, wow, he's got a six pack, or he's big, he's muscular, he's vascular, he's strong. Oh. But they don't think like that when they get older. When they get older, they're not gonna value you if you can't produce sperm. They're gonna look at you as just the fuck buddy. They're gonna be like, oh, this is just the fuck buddy who I don't have to worry about getting me pregnant. They're not going to have any, they're not going to look at you, yeah, this is going to be a husband where I want to have a family with. So just think about this stuff. And I've talked to a lot of young guys, and I've always asked them, I say, you want a family? Most of them, believe it or not, Mobster, most of the younger generation now, they actually want families. I think it's kind of switched. Because my generation, it was much less about having families
Mm.
when I was coming out of high school. But now the high schoolers, a lot of them do want families. They look at the family structure as like a good thing, and a lot of them want to use steroids. Okay, and a lot of them don't realize that if they start using steroids, that it's going to affect their fertility and it may permanently destroy their fertility. So you got
Yes,
to keep that in mind as you get older, and you might want to make the decision to talk to your doctor about getting your sperm frozen. You may want to talk to your doctor about different options when it comes to doing that, just to keep him just to keep that as an option going forward. Because
yes.
once you lose the ability to produce sperm, it's very hard to restart it. So let's get into ancillaries that have possible benefits. We'll spend a few minutes on this. Now, Ultima has several different ancillaries that you can use to boost fertility, both on cycle, post cycle, or whether you're not even using steroids. So Clomid is the first one, universally respected by people who know what they're talking about, not by online gurus. Because there's actual studies on Clomid that have shown that it can boost fertility in men when stacked with vitamin E. In fact, the only study, Mobster, that's a legitimate study out there that has shown something can be taken to boost fertility in men is Clomid and vitamin E. That's the only one that's ever been done and completed, believe it or not. So this is the one to go. And the nice thing about Clomid is it doesn't have negative consequences to using it. So you can dose it 12 and a half milligrams to 50 milligrams a day. It can come with side effects, don't get me wrong, but it can't have any type of feedback consequences. So that's one of the options you could do. More options, HCG and HMG. And HCG is derived from pregnant female urine. So it's synthesized. So you're not actually injecting the urine, but you're injecting synthesized version of the urine where that was made in the lab. And what these do is they mimic the hormones that stimulate your Leydig cells and trick them into producing sperm and testosterone. However, let me caution you before you start using, a lot of people want to use this, and let me just caution that neither one of these was ever approved to be used for male fertility. And number two, they've never been shown in conclusive studies to actually boost fertility. But they have helped people over the years, and a big part of that is you're skipping over your pituitary glands and you're feeding your Leydig cells. So it's a big gamble if you're going to use these. This is a last ditch, throw the kitchen sink at the situation thing that you can do where it's do or die. Because if you're wrong and you don't succeed, it will actually cause more damage because it's shutting down your pituitary glands even more. So it's actually preventing your pituitary glands from waking up. So it is a risky thing to use these, but it is an option in a dire situation. And it wouldn't hurt either to combine it with Clomid and vitamin E as well. So these are products that you can get from Ultima. They do sell them. But I would start with the Clomid, as an option first before you start going with these other hormones. Momster, touch on
I'm,
that
look,
really quick before
I'm,
we.
I'm looking very quickly, just for the listeners' benefit, at the Ultima product range, and they do an Ultima Clomid 50, and they do an HCG 10,000 IU and an HCG 5,000 IU. So absolutely, I've seen what's called baby making protocols, Steve. But I would agree with Steve. I know that we've seen some success stories, but what we've also seen is people come on, talked about these protocols, and they either don't get the answer that they want, or we don't get to find out if it was successful. And I suspect when they don't come back, it's just not worked out, and they're so pissed off or unhappy, Steve, that they don't come back to let us know. So it didn't work. I'm kind of fucked. That's people don't want to give you that kind of information. But absolutely, these products are available from Ultima. I think the phrase that we like to use when we talk about this kind of thing is a one-stop shop, and they definitely have some options for you that could help you. But again, make sure your diet's on point, your training's on point, your lifestyle's fixed, etc. And listen to some of the other advice we've given you already. These things might help, but some of the other advice we're going to give you after this will also help you. Hopefully, I wish we could give you a guarantee, guys, but hopefully the advice we give you is going to be beneficial. in some of the decision making for cycles, length of cycles, frequency of cycles, and so on and so forth. Back to you, Steve.
So let's get over short and mild cycles that you should consider to keep your fertility as you get older. Now, let's say you start, you want to, starting from today, you want to use steroids, but you also want to preserve your fertility as much as you can. So let me give you the biggest tip is that keep your cycles short. What we know is once you run longer cycles,
Yeah.
okay, the longer you stay shut down, the less the more hard it is. I'll put it that way. The less more hard it is for your body to recover,
Yeah.
including your fertility, including your LH, your FSH, your pituitary glands, your Leydig cells to come back. It's just like a tree. The tree goes dormant during the winter, then in the spring it blooms beautifully. But if you spray herbicide around the tree and you spray a lot of crap around the tree will have a hard time coming back and it may not come back. So it's the same thing that consider shorter cycles. And let me explain something else. Learn about steroid half-lives and esters. Listen to more of our
Yes.
podcasts. But basically, let me put
Yeah.
it this way. If you run a long ester, you go 12 weeks, that steroid will still shut you down for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 more weeks after
Yeah.
your last injection. It doesn't just come out of your system the next day. So if you want to get your fertility back and you want to bounce back quicker, it's better to use shorter esters that are going to be out of your system in 2 or 3 weeks versus 8 or 9 weeks. So avoid the longer esters. So we're going to talk about in this segment short acting options that you can get good results on.
Let me just talk about the length of the cycle. When I mentioned this to Steve in a pre-show, it's something that I've always been a fan of anyway. So occasionally we will see people talk about 20-week cycles, sometimes with short, sometimes with longer esters, which, as Steve's just pointed out, really means arguably you have suppression for half a year, 20 weeks plus 5 or 6 weeks, as just Steve just said. 12 weeks. I've done one 16-week cycle in my life. My preference is for shorter. And one of the reasons my preference is for shorter, which is not to do with suppression, is thus. And if it helps negate the issues of suppression, that has to be a bonus. You can run, arguably, Steve, one 20-week cycle per year because you're up against a half year and not have enough time for clearance and not have enough time for complete system recovery before you run another cycle of the same length in a year. You might get away with two 12-week cycles, again, with longer esters because of the time on cycle and the time off cycle and full recovery, and then back on cycle again. But what about the 8-week option? 8 to 12. So if you said 8 weeks, Steve, that's 8 weeks on with short to medium esters, with full recovery inside another 8 weeks. And you can actually repeat that 3 times and still not be up against a 52-week buffer. And that's just on a 12-month basis. So it makes a lot more sense. And that's without getting into the products, etc., etc. That's just that particular way. Arguably, and Steve and I have actually done this. I've done this multiple times, especially ironically, Steve, not as a fertility thing, just in the last few years. Very few of my cycles when I'm using orals are 4 weeks. And again, the injectables, 8 weeks. So let's get into the actual specific steroids that we would like to talk about here, Steve. Let me throw up a couple of ones at the front. And I'm a huge fan of Anavar, Steve, and of course, Ultima has multiple Anavar options, I believe in 10 and 50 milligrams. 4 to 8 weeks, at between 30 to 50 milligrams a day. This is just an oral because, as Steve will tell you, orals typically have a much shorter clearance time, that how quick it gets out of the body. And again, I've had great results with 30 milligrams. So 30 milligrams for 4 to 8 weeks, Steve, using the 10 or 50 milligram options from Ultima would be a very, very simple approach. Give the listeners another oral option. I'm thinking a T-bol, for example, that's minimally suppressive on the body.
Yeah, so for cutting, Anavar, as you mentioned, Turinabol, as you mentioned, and Winstrol would be wonderful. If you want to bulk up, Anadrol or Dianabol would be wonderful. And with some of these, you can just get good results in 4 or 5 weeks. Some of them you can push 6, 7, 8 weeks. And then the nice thing about it is when you stop using them, they're out of your system quicker. So that would be a great option. With the Anavar, Turinabol, Winstrol, anywhere from 25 to 50 milligrams is good. Anadrol, same thing, 25 to 50 milligrams. I've always done 25 milligrams. Dianabol, somewhere between 20 and 30 milligrams max would be really good. Some people push it up to 40 or 50 on the Dianabol. Just be careful with the estrogen issues when you're taking it. In terms of injectables, look, testosterone propionate would be perfect if you want testosterone. It's got a much shorter half life. It's in your system quicker and it's out of your system quicker. So when you stop using it, it's going to take about 2 or 3 weeks to be out of your system. So you can run the test probe for 6 weeks, 7 weeks, 8 weeks. So let's say you go 8 weeks. By week 10, week 11, it will be out of your system so you can start the recovery process. But if you use a longer ester, like Cypionate, for example, it'll take 5, 6, 7 weeks to be out of your system. More like 6 or 7 weeks. So if you stop it after 10 weeks, it's still going to be in your system after 16 or 17 weeks. You see? So it's going to shut you down for a longer period of time. You're not going to be able to recover as easier. So that's a good option. When it comes to nandrolone, instead of going with DECA, go with NPP. NPP is nandrolone phenylpropionate. It's going to be in and out of your system quicker than DECA would. DECA would take a long time to be out of your system, 8, 9 weeks to be out of your system, even longer in some cases.
What about the dosage, Steve? What you
Yeah,
mentioned the prop, just test prop as an example.
yeah.
We talk about cycles, typical cycles, testosterone cycles could easily be 500 milligrams, but it's not carved in stone, guys. So anywhere between 200 and 300 of a shorter ester, as Steve just said, would be a great option. So talk about that as well.
Yeah, it just depends on how much testosterone you want. You can go 100 milligrams if you want to do like a TRT type of short cycle, which doesn't make any sense, but some people like to do it just to kind of, help them a little bit. Let's say you've got low testosterone levels, you just want to run some testosterone for like 8 or 10 weeks just to get your numbers back to normal. So you just do 100 milligrams. I mean, but usually 500 milligrams, 400 milligrams would be a better dose. When it comes to the NPP, somewhere between 250, 300 milligrams would be good. Some people go to 400. A couple more options for you. Tren Ace, if you want to go the aggressive route, would be in and out of your system quicker than the Tren E. And then Masteron Propionate would be wonderful if you want a hardening benefits. It's in and out of your system much quicker than Masteron E. So these are really, really good options as well. The Tren, I would go 200 to 300 milligrams and I would keep the cycle at 7 weeks or less. Masteron Prop, you can go up to 500 milligrams a week, and I'd keep it 8 or 10 weeks at the max. So really, we want to max out our cycle at 10 weeks and use these short esters to our advantage. As Mobster said earlier, you want to spend most of the year off of steroids, so maybe do 1 or 2 cycles a year maximum. And you want to spend most of the year off. This way, your reproductive system can keep humming. You don't want to ruin your reproductive system. And that's what you're going to have to do until you get the objective of having children or having your fertility get to the point where you can have children. Once you decide, you know what, I'm done, then you could start abusing steroids and go that route if that's what you want to
Yeah,
do.
yeah, yeah,
But in the
absolutely.
meantime, I would keep these short esters and use them to your advantage. Now, some of the disadvantages of these short esters, if you're using injectables, you're going to have to inject them more often. Also, some of these shorter esters, like the testosterone propionate, can hurt. So, a trick is mixing the oil with a different oil. So, if you want to use Test Probe, for example, mix in some Masteron Probe with it. And that will kind of dilute it a little bit and really take the edge off. Or mix in some MPP with it. That will dilute it and keep the edge off.
What
So,
companies like Ultima sometimes do, Steve, and I've seen this before, and I think I'm looking at products exactly like that, is they won't dose the shorter esters in a high milligram per milliliter. So, as Steve's quite properly said, if it was a high dosage shorter ester, for example, the test prop that Steve talked about, typically 75 to 100 milligrams seems to be the per milliliter because they know that you're going to inject 2 or 3 times a week. And it makes sense in that particular way rather than, for example, 200 or even 300 milligrams per milliliter and have you split the dose. And they know that this is the reasons why. And in some people, and it has got better, over time. Years ago, and I've argued this before in the past, even proven wrong, shorter ester stung. Higher milligram per milliliter, high dose products stung. That used to be the case. It was almost a given. The combination of better oils, better production processes, and a better understanding of how these things work. It's precisely why companies like Ultima do the 75 and 100 milligram per milliliter options, because they know how you're going to inject it. The better quality control and the better oils mean there's less post-injection pain, and so on and so forth. It's not impossible, and some of you will be specifically have a kind of allergic response sometimes to the oil, regardless. It's just that you're specially sensitive. Very few people now have issues with the 450 and the 500 milligram products. In those examples as well, that's much better than it used to be. And sometimes, without us even realizing it, Steve, it's just, and I've been guilty of this again, I'm sure Steve has as well, piss poor injection protocols. Just the way that we're injecting, keep injecting the same sites, using the wrong size needle gauges, so on and so forth, without realizing that we're doing it. So all of these things we've covered on our other shows. We talked about these particular things. It's got a lot better, and companies like Ultima have a much better understanding. They're not gung-ho giving you as many milligrams as they think people might want. They actually realize how customers can use their product and produce great products for that particular reason, Steve.
Yeah, and Ultima knows what they're doing. They're a trusted brand. Ultima is one of those steroids that brands that whether you're an average Joe, gym rat, weekend warrior, all the way up to professional, they trust Ultima. When you get Ultima, are getting what you're getting. Can you imagine running any of these protocols we're giving you, short esters? Let's say you order Test Probe and they send you Test E or Test SIP. They're like, they're not gonna know any difference. Well, you're gonna get shut down longer, and this could screw up your fertility in the process. Or imagine ordering NPP, but they really send you DECA. They're like, customer won't notice the difference. A lot of sources out there will do that. A lot of brands will do that. So we got to be careful. It can literally screw you up big time when a brand or a source does that kind of shit. So
Yeah,
mislabeling products happens all the time. You got to use a trusted brand. Come on the forum and find out where to get Ultima because they are legitimate. One of the things about Ultima that's really cool is the different products that they have.
yeah,
So different options that they have. They're one-stop shop. They have everything. They have on cycle products, ancillaries that you're going to need on cycle, PCT products. They have other things as well, things that you wouldn't think like peptides, dig drugs like Viagra and Cialis. They have all kinds
yeah.
of things on their website, so you can literally order whatever you need right from them, and you don't have to go and order from multiple places. So they're very trusted place. Their gear has been anonymously sent out and tested, and we found out that their gear is not only labeled correctly, but the dosing is
Yes,
correct, which is also
yes.
important because we
Let me
don't want
touch
to.
on some of that. Let me touch on some of that, Steve. I'm literally looking at one of their peptides on a reseller site that's coming soon. They're expanding their range all the time. I'll touch on something I touched upon earlier on, and then get into more about Ultima as well. So, listen, guys, the history of PEDs and manufacturing processes goes from the dirty kitchen videos that we've seen to the Mexican labs, the Thai labs, the companies that have been and gone over the years, and so on and so forth. Okay, so what we've started to see, and Ultima is a great example of this, is companies that are literally as close to being, and in one or two examples actually are, properly full-blown pharmaceutical companies in big buildings with proper labs. I've seen photographs of the scales they need to use, Steve, $20,000, $30,000 just for the fucking scales. The manufacturing prices, literally conveyor belts, all that kind of stuff. Not, and I've seen an example back in the day of one company that was producing bills in what was literally a hired for your home cement mixer versus the sterility products. I've been to companies that produce products to the higher sterility levels that are required for actual food and licensing approvals and so on and so forth. I've worked for food companies in the past, specifically with product development towards the end of my career there. So I understand how some of these things work, plus my time with supplement companies. When we're looking at stuff like the testing processes, it used to be that you were very lucky to see testing processes of any description in the raws, in the product, in-house, and so on and so forth. And it's now becoming an industry standard, and Ultima are up there 100%, Steve, where not only do they test in-house to make sure that the people down on the production belt are doing their job, but make sure the potency of the products that they're selling to you are exactly what they say on the label. Then they will not only do the in-house testing, they will take products from the lab, from this conveyor belt, from the production line, and send these off to independent labs. What you will see, and Ultima is again a good example of this, is it's nearly always there are multiple labs that can do the testing. It didn't used to be the case, it is now. But at some point, and I'm thinking of one example in my head as I say this, pretty much every lab that produces steroids, including Ultima, they go to one of about 3 companies that do the outside the manufacturing process testing, call it second or third party if you like. And that's because those labs are respected. You can literally see the number of the certificate of the lab test result, and you can go to that lab, the company that's doing the testing, insert the number in, and see it come up. That's to show you that it's an authentic. It's not a fake test. It's not been something that's produced on Paint Shop Pro or some sort of photo manipulation program. Literally, you can put that number in and see the lab test results, not just the one on the screen that's been presented to you, but at the lab itself. They have to keep these records. And the final one that Steve mentioned already is where we have literally seen back in the day, Steve, that used to be quite too expensive, and collectives, I might have even been part of one briefly, would put together a few $100 each, typically $100, $200 each, and you'd end up with a couple of $1,000, and then they would get some random products, and these random products will be tested. It's now the price of the test has come down sufficiently, and I'm thinking of one example that Steve and I are both familiar with, where one individual that we know that's present on our forum spent a few $100 of their own money and had 10 labs testing. These are all approved sources like Ultima. Every single one passed. He actually thought, the person that had done the test, I thought 2 or 3 would fail, which more, it was like a 70% pass rate. It was a 100% pass rate. All of them, and I'm actually thinking of a thread on the Australian forum just this week, Steve. Every single one in the example I'm thinking of passed within the percentage that's allowable within the pharmaceutical industry, which I believe is somewhere between 5 and 20%. These were all within 3%. Some slightly over, some ever so slightly under. I think we were looking at 98%. And the ones that are over 102, 103%. So they were slightly more potent than they should have been. And then, of course, and I've actually mentioned this again in the Australian section, about cleanliness. Heavy metals need to be tested for in the Chinese raws and so on and so forth. So again, companies like Ultima don't get to last in the industry if they're not, like the rest of the industry, doing these tests. And I know, let me touch on one more thing as well. And I mentioned this a few minutes ago. So not only are they expanding their range all the time, including the peptide that I was looking at, as I spoke to you guys earlier, but they're also looking, as I touched upon before, how you are going to use these products. What do you need if you are using these products? So we talked about ancillaries. What do you need to help you with your fertility? So they've got products for that. What about the ED drugs that Steve said? They've got products for that. They've got products to pump your balls. They've got products to help you with your sperm production and sperm creation. They've got products to help you get cut. They've got products that are specifically developed to be exactly like the cycle. It's still a thing where guys will take 1 or 2 different steroids and create a stack out of them. And you can have the flexibility to change a cycle as you go along. But for the most part, you've also got products where these products have been put together into a blend of the same high qualities that we've just discussed, because that's exactly what people are going to do. So when we talk about the traditional 500 milligram cycles, but we can also talk about one of my favorite bulkers, Suster Deca, and so on and so forth. There will always be people that are using test enanthate or test prop, but if they're going to use test prop, they might use trenacetate. So there will be products with tren and test together in the shorter ester version. Their fat strip type products are a combination of shorter ester things. I've run similar products for 4 weeks and got great results. And one of the things that Steve I like to talk about as I finish this show, Steve, is we recommend and we talk about companies because we've had personal experience of them, whether it's Ultima or other companies, and we know personally that we've had great results. And I challenge a listener in this particular regard to come onto our forums to see people that have used Ultima and how they rate and regard it. And not just our forums, but other forums. And you end up finding that the companies like Ultima are recommended because they have the quality that we discussed, because people have got great results for them. We hope that you've enjoyed the show today in regards to the kind of information that we put out, understanding the effects some of these products might have on your body and how you can manipulate the variables and break down the risk versus rewards from complete shutdown to just minimal suppression by having shorter cycles, by using shorter esters, by trying to maintain your flexibility when it comes to your fertility levels and so on and so forth. Steve, any final words before we finish the show, Steve?
Yeah, come to the forum. You can do a fertility log. We have a couple guys doing that
Yeah.
actually, and we're really good to follow you and see that you have success with the fertility thing. So it's a very exciting time, those of you who want to have kids, when
Yes.
you try to come off the gear and you try to do this and you try to get your sperm count up. And it's really exciting too to hear stories that are of people who are following
Success.
what we're
Yes.
saying and getting success when it comes
Yes.
to this, because this can be a very stressful situation.
We can help you with that, guys. Come onto the forums. The people with other experiences can help you with that and help you understand how you're going to feel, help you maximize your fertility, get that sperm count back if it's possible. And not only that, especially if you guys are successful, you will be helping other listeners just like you with your experiences, telling them how it's like, what you had to do, the test that you had to undergo, and so on and so forth. And if you are successful, that would be absolutely fucking amazing. And you would be helping arguably, Steve, tens of thousands of other people just like yourself. That would be fantastic. Please note, we are not doctors and the opinions are ours. It's our view and based on our experience and views on the topic. Our podcasts are for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment apply.